We are extremely pleased to have as our guest speakers TCF Bank VP, Digital Center of Excellence, Lynn Farley, Senior Data Privacy Engineer, Bismarck Herrera, and Compuware Product Manager, Irene Ford, with us to join us for today's broadcast. With that, I'd now like to welcome and hand things over to Irene.
Thanks, Janet. Compuware has talked a lot about DevOps over the last several quarters, but we've really focused on managing application code and getting that code safely deployed to production. But code can't function without data. So we really have two offerings within Topaz. We have Topaz for program analysis for code-related tasks, and Topaz for enterprise data for data-related tasks. At a core, every application exists to process the data that's required by the business. So in our little diagram here, we're showing some red circles indicating that data is the lifeblood of the DevOps cycle. Lack of good test data can easily become a bottleneck in the DevOps flow. And today's applications and the data associated with them are really more complex than ever. The requirements for data are also more diverse, since application data resides on multiple platforms and in many different formats. Automated testing is critical to keeping pace with the application development cycles, but it does increase demands on managing test data. So the challenge here is to make sure that the right data is readily available for each stage of development and testing. Customers want to be able to create repeatable processes, which can then be leveraged by many others. So in effect, they want to have expertise by proxy, where people who are familiar with the data create data requests, which can then be executed by others who may not have the experience or skill levels needed to create the initial requests for data. Topaz for Enterprise Data helps developers, testers, and analysts understand their data and its relationship to other data. And of course, good test data management will support the DevOps objectives of quality, velocity, efficiency, and privacy. Now, it may seem obvious, but to improve quality, we need to build applications with fewer defects. But to do that, developers must be able to quickly and easily get the data they need for testing. And that test data has to be realistic and mirror the conditions of the real production data. It must also be relationally intact and represent a subset of the real data. And as we said earlier, since applications operate across platforms, data must be consistent between data sources on different platforms. And your test data has to be able to be continuously enhanced to build out any missing conditions once they're identified. Now, the next two, quality and velocity, are very closely related. Customers are continuously striving to find the balance between velocity and quality. Unfortunately, increasing velocity can easily cause quality to suffer. Customers need to be able to achieve greater throughput with higher quality just to meet the demands of the business. And all of this needs to be accomplished even though they are regularly losing staff. Automated testing is critical to producing quality applications and to increasing velocity, but tests are only as good as the data upon which the tests are based. As you know, application failures are often caused by anomalies found in the data once the application is deployed to production. So to increase velocity, developers and testers must be able to easily provision test data without relying on external groups who may have conflicting priorities. And TCF will be sharing today with us how they have been able to provide data to their agile development teams. Topaz for Enterprise Data provides the same user experience to manage data across the enterprise, whether the data resides on the mainframe or in a database on a distributed server. Now, having this consistent approach to working on data will reduce the overall cost of data management and increase the efficiency of your development team. So wherever possible, data tools should have the same look and feel, regardless of where the data resides. So when a developer wants to edit data, it shouldn't matter if that data is in a vSAM file, a DB2 table, an IMS database, or an Oracle database. The very same set of tools should handle them all. Topaz for Enterprise Data makes it easy to handle data transformations between platforms and data structures. And developers don't need to be familiar with the differences between the platforms and data types because the tools themselves have built-in rules for mapping between databases and formats. And privacy is certainly another important thing to consider. Data must always be protected from misuse. In fact, masking of sensitive data is not an option, it's the law. Now, given the importance of protecting personal identifying information, or PII, as well as the need to comply with regulatory mandates like GDPR, means that data masking is a top concern for most companies. These regulations also apply during development and testing, and especially when these functions are outsourced. Now, although the exact data privacy regulations may vary from country to country, they all require that any data which can be used to identify an individual must be masked. In addition, any data that could be damaging to the business if it were exposed must be masked before it can be used outside of production. So data privacy must always be part of a broader data management strategy. Now, as we've worked with our customers, they have confirmed that extracting data from production is usually the best plan to getting realistic sets of related data for testing, training, and for analytics. But access to production is very restricted. Now, although the idea of generating synthetic data may seem very appealing, we have found that it is rarely successful. Generating data for a single file is one thing, but generating a full set of related data is far more complex. Many of these applications are decades old and have complex data relationships built into the code. And then to make matters worse, the people who really understood the application flow are long gone. So that production data then really does represent the truth for your application data. Now, many customers establish a central data management group whose responsibility it is to extract data from production and mask it before it leaves the production environment. And each of these non-production usages of data may in fact require different masking rules. But once the data has been masked in the production environment, that masked data can then be moved to lower environments for testing. Often that masked data is treated as a gold copy of data from which developers and testers can then obtain the data they need for their specific tests. Topaz for Enterprise Data and FileAid support data actions on both sides of that bridge. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Lynn and to Bismarck to share some of the challenges they have faced in building out the data privacy practice at TCF.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Farley, and I'm a manager on the digital banking team, and I also manage the test data privacy practice at TCF Bank. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't familiar with TCF Bank, let me tell you a little bit about us. We started doing business in 1923 and became a savings and loan in 1936. Today, we are a national bank holding company with approximately $23 billion in total assets and are headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. TCF's IT shop is a multi-platform shop with a combination of old and new technologies, many of which are siloed. This creates very complex environments, both from a development perspective and a data perspective. As an example, our core banking application is highly customized, has batch processing, and resides on the mainframe, which also integrates with many other applications and ultimately with our digital banking platform, which offers real-time information and is a hosted solution where data resides with the vendor. Until recently, TCF was primarily a waterfall shop, struggling to keep up with ongoing changes to requirements through lengthy projects. As a step towards DevOps, application teams were realigned into product teams, and operations support was moved from being centrally located in our I&O team back into product teams. All product teams were at transition to an agile development methodology, and the teams are working to automate QA testing and code deploys. TCF has supported the shift to agile by hiring agile coaches and offering ongoing training and support. TCF also recognized the need to assess tech stacks to sunset, replace, or upgrade older technologies. We invested in our mainframe environment and are looking at additional monitoring tools to mitigate downtime and provide additional reporting. We are a mid-size IT shop, which is a combination of development and support teams, and we operate with a very small test data privacy team. In the last 18 months, TCF transitioned to a product model, both in IT and in our business teams. By doing so, budgets, operating models, team skill sets, to name a few, were all impacted. Working with so many product teams have created challenges and opportunities for our small team. We understand the importance of being responsive to test data requests. We don't want the teams to find creative ways of moving production data into lower environments, but keeping up with the demand has created opportunities to improve processes and pursue automation. Next slide, please. One of the goals of our IT teams is to accomplish more work by deploying frequently with fewer defects. As we continue to drive forward with that goal, TCF has acquired new software, invested time and dollars in architecting new infrastructure environments, implemented automation where possible, and transitioned from a primarily waterfall shop to continuous development and deployment using Agile. To align our TDP team to our organizational goals, we migrated to the current release of File 8 and Topaz, upgraded our TDP environments, and participate in continuous deployment and plan to automate our test data environment refreshes. Next slide, please. The mission of our TDP team is to implement efficient data privacy processes for obfuscated data, exception reporting, and subsetting to satisfy product teams' needs for obfuscated data. To accomplish our mission, we've implemented data privacy processes with a flexible architecture. The flexible architecture will allow us to add new obfuscated data sources to existing environments with minimal effort. We are fortunate to have an experienced TDP architect and developer, who you will hear from shortly, who helped us accomplish this. Next, we identified all core banking applications that feed into other platforms and created obfuscation rules and masking jobs for that data. Future opportunities include working with QA teams to assist with subsetting and partnering with Compuware to define and develop on-demand exception reporting to identify PII in non-production environments. Now I will turn it over to Bismarck, who will discuss some of the TDP opportunities that our team has encountered.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, testing is a very important phase of the software development process, and it may be the most critical regarding data privacy concerns. Like any other bank, we have PII spread in multiple applications that share data across platforms. Data relationships are very complex, and each application has its own business rules, and because of that, keeping data in sync is a very difficult task. This diagram illustrates the complexity of the applications that we privatize. This is just an example of one of our applications with multiple data sources. Multiple vendors send us different types of data in different files. We get text files, CSV files, pipe delimited, etc. And that data goes into our systems. Once we ingest the files, the data is processed in different ways across the application. Some data goes to the mainframe and some other to databases. In order to provide data for testing or software development, we need to identify all the data sources, but most importantly, the ones that contain PII. Privatizing data is quite a challenge. After identifying the data sources, our next task is to protect the data by developing data privacy rules for all data sources. In order to create obfuscated data that looks like production data, we need to take into consideration the attributes of each data source while developing data privacy rules. That's why I believe that data analysis is the most critical phase of any data privacy implementation. Doing in-depth analysis will improve your chances of preserving the integrity of the data during the masking process. At the same time, you will be preserving the data characteristics that will make the data look like real data. For example, this application requires address standardization. That's one of the business rules. So after masking the data, we got to make sure that the addresses are valid. This diagram is showing us how the Compuware tools fit into our TDP process. The first thing we have to do is to identify the Compuware tools that are appropriate to obfuscate each data type. Usually we privatize the data where it's originated, and that way the obfuscated data will flow into the lower level components of the application. Most product teams at TCF have adopted or are in the process of adopting agile methodologies. There are multiple projects running at the same time with shorter development sprints. The impact of this in our TDP practice is the frequency of the requests that we receive to generate testing data, and the time that we have to complete those requests is shorter. In other words, we have less time to generate the same quality data for multiple projects in a shorter period. We're not only trying to support different projects, but they are also in different stages of their sprints. In the past years, we struggled a little to build a fully functional test data privacy environment because it had to be secure enough to process PII, but at the same time, it had to be flexible to allow us to copy mask data to lower environments. It may be frustrating to be in the middle of your data privacy implementation and find out that you don't have access to certain data, or your credentials don't have the authority to copy data from point A to B in your network, or you don't have permissions to create a table in a database. In addition, there may be other users accessing the servers where your tools are installed, so you cannot just upgrade your tools and reboot the servers whenever you want. Sharing resources with other teams may become a problem in the short term. Those are just a few of many examples of issues that you may encounter if you don't have an environment that fits your IT shop requirements. After a successful data obfuscation implementation, the data in your lower environment is clean and there's no MPI or PII being used for testing and development purposes. That's great, but how long will it take to users to insert data in lower environments again? The last step of a successful TDP practice is to make sure that the data stays obfuscated and there's no new PII introduced in test. It doesn't take long to find PII in test, even when you have recently refreshed the environment with masked data. So some of the actions that we have taken at TCF to overcome those challenges are, well, first of all, we had to update our TDP roadmap. We used to have our own agenda. We had a list of applications that we wanted to obfuscate because those were the core applications, but we had to redefine priorities and focus on the projects that are critical for our business. Also, we have adopted privacy by design, which basically means that data protection should be included from the start when designing new systems and not be added later. We get involved with the projects where testing data will be required since the planning phase. Agile projects usually don't require all data sources to be obfuscated for each sprint. we have been collaborating with the data architects and subject matter experts to identify the data that will be tested on each sprint. So we don't have to worry about delivering full sets of obfuscated files and tables if they are not being tested. By being part of the projects, we learn about the applications since we have direct contact with application users and data architects. They know where the data sources are located and can tell where the PII is located. They also know how the data flows across the applications. Optimized TDP analysis allowed us to improve our obfuscation process design, and we have created new translation tables to make sure that we have obfuscated data that satisfies the requirements for all applications. All applications have their own particular requirements, but we have created a solid practice that helps us to develop data privacy jobs in a quicker manner. Also, we built a new environment. We worked with our information security team, with the DBAs, with infrastructure and the mainframe system admins to design a new environment exclusively for TDP. On the distributed side, we own the servers, so we don't have to coordinate with other teams to reboot the servers after upgrading the tools. That's easier for maintenance. Also, we use the Compuware tools because we need consistent obfuscated data across applications. Compuware is delivering new functionality more frequently, so we have created a plan to keep the tools up to date. We also have designed our TDP environment in a way that allows us to migrate data privacy projects by applying the minimum changes required to be functional in production. We have optimized our JCL as well as our data privacy rules. And also, in order to make sure that the data stays clean in non-production environments, we have developed a tool that helps us to identify PII in testing environments. In order to fit into DevOps, we need to empower our users by developing automated tools to refresh their own environments. We don't have time to manually execute obfuscation jobs when testing data is required on demand. That's why we're trying to figure out a way to use some tools that we have at TCF, like Jenkins and ServiceNow, to enable users to customize the execution of the jobs. This is different than using a task or job scheduler because sometimes the jobs need to be tweaked to select data that meet specific criteria, for example, to select a specific range of dates. We want users to have a list of masking jobs that they can pick from a list to execute them. Now I'll turn it back to Lynn for conclusions.
So in conclusion, why is data important in DevOps? We have found that production-like data in test increases reliability, reduces time to delivery, and reduces bugs in production. And our partnership with Compuware has been exceptional. They have been very responsive and reactive to our software issues. They've provided us with availability to development teams to provide ongoing support. And they've also been very supportive in helping us accomplish our vision for self-service refresh enablement for our team members. So in the end, we've found that we have a great partnership and continue to look forward to solving some of our challenges and opportunities in the near future.
Thanks, Len. Thanks, Bismarck, for sharing your story. Before we start answering your questions, we'd like to again encourage everyone to fill out the short survey to be entered into our $50 American Express gift card. And with that, let's start our Q&A.
Excellent. Okay, so the first question we have is, Have all of your product teams transitioned to a DevOps model? And can you talk about the challenges?
This is Lynn. So that's still a work in progress for us. We have specific teams that do a very good job of that, but with the environments that we have and the legacy systems that we have, some of those technologies can be a bit challenging. So it's still a work in progress.
A path that we're all walking together, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question I have is also for you, and it asks, do you have any full database loads from your mainframe data, or did you work through the exercise of subsetting data before loading into the test environment?
We do both, but mostly full volumes. And the reason for that is that we don't know what type of data will be tested in the next sprint for each project. So we decided to have everything available. So if we need to adjust a subset of the data, we have it already obfuscated.
Excellent. Makes perfect sense. And the next question is asking, how often do you refresh test data? And how do you ensure the expected states of the test data for predictable outcomes?
Well, we have jobs running on a daily basis, but also we refresh the environments on demand.
On demand.
And the reason for that is because depending on what their testing teams are doing, I mean, sometimes they need to refresh the data more frequently, or sometimes they can just test with the same data.
Oh, interesting.
So that's up to the users.
So it kind of depends on the cycle of the individual team.
Exactly.
Oh, makes perfect sense. Okay, let's see what we have here. I should have been looking at questions instead of listening to your answer. Okay, it says, I see that you're privatizing both mainframe and distributed data. On an average, how much data are you processing? What's the frequency? You kind of answered the frequency question already.
Yeah.
In terms of refreshing.
About the volumes, I mean, it's hard to tell, but some of the applications that we have probably 50 million rows or 50 million records. So that's an average.
Okay, the next one is asking, what was the source code management tool at TCF? And is the source code management tool integrated into Topaz? They're asking if you're using Changeman or Endeavor, or what tool you actually use for managing source.
Changeman.
Changeman. Okay, and then another question here is, how was the Jenkins pipeline integrated into DevOps flow? And what's the starting point for the DevOps cycle?
That's a work in progress. I mean, we are not at that point yet. That's where we want to go. But
you're still developing the processes of getting it all automated.
Right. This is Lynn, we've been working with, or we will be working with our automation teams to determine, first of all, we have to define the workflow for our TDP processes, and then once we've done that, we'll have to determine which tools will be used to do what, and then we're hoping to get that done by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next one must be from a budget person. They're asking, how do you manage the budget for testing? Since if you have full data sets of the production data, does this not cost a lot of money?
Well, we're part of the enterprise services team, so we support all groups. and we have a couple of dedicated people that work on this, so it rolls up to our enterprise budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that's helpful.
Do you have any kind of alerting system looking for potential PI that is not production environments?
We have a compare process that we developed in order to analyze the testing data. That process runs every month, and it creates tickets for the people responsible for the data where there's a PII in test.
Mike, we have lots of questions this morning. Okay, are you
Good.
okay to take another one?
Yes.
Okay. All right, this one says, how do you provide data independence from multiple testing teams who need ZOS-based DB2, for example?
Well, we don't have DB2 right now, but I think that question may apply to other data sources. So basically, again, so by creating full sets of data, we are ready to provide subsets of data for different teams. Mm-hmm. So we know that there are some core applications that provide data for multiple other systems, and basically by having full volumes of data, we can provide that.
So then does each team really have their own copy of the tables, the DB2 tables, or are they sharing? I think that's what he's asking.
No,
here.
they have their own.
Each team has their own copy.
Yes.
Okay. And let's see, next question is, what is the size of your dev and product teams and the size of your TDP team? I know you said as we went through it that you have a small TDP team supporting multiple development teams, and you're able to handle the data requests from all those teams with your small TDP team.
Right. So we're a team of two. Our TDP team is two engineers. We're responsible for doing all the upfront analysis on the data, identifying the PII, working to get data source connections, but by having a solid framework and architecture in place, the diagram that we shared earlier, it makes the work of adding new sources and doing the additional analysis much easier if you have a well-designed architecture. So that's how we're able to support it with such a small team. It did take us, some time to get that environment together, but the ongoing support isn't as onerous as the picture might lead you to believe.
How can this help with our GDPR projects?
Well, if you protect your testing data, you are in compliance. So basically, and one of the important aspects of GDPR is, it's very interesting, is the right to be forgotten, which means that when your clients stop doing business with you, they have the right to ask you to delete their data. it may be easy for you to identify where the data is in production, but if you don't have a strong test data privacy practice, the client's data may be propagated to other lower environments without you knowing about. So finding client data in non-production environment may be difficult if you are not already masking the data.
That makes sense. Perfect. Okay, so we have lots of questions here. And the next one is asking, how many concurrent test environments do you support in parallel, or is it limited? How do you manage the costs of multiple parallel test systems?
Well, each team has its own testing environment. So basically, we have as many testing environments as testing teams we have. And regarding the cost, I think every line of product, it's under budget, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, so each application team budgets their own DASI requirements and so forth. Yeah, okay. Now here's a question about getting started with a test data privacy project. They're asking, did you engage Compuware to kick off your initiative with test data privacy, or how did you get started with this journey?
Yeah, initially yes, because one of the important things that you have to consider is to find the right tool for your shop, right? So, of course, if you're starting this practice, I'm sure that you will have to shop around. And we ended up partnering with Compuware because Compuware has the tools that we require to obfuscate data on the mainframe and distributed environments. So, yeah, Compuware helped us to start implementing the tools at TCF.
Mm-hmm. And this is another similar one. Does the bank use the Compuware TDP solution to document their work?
Yes, we do.
That's pretty much how you started,
yeah, exactly.
Going through that methodology and identifying your sensitive data and then building out the rules. Or building out first, I think, data elements and then building out the rules.
Yeah, we follow the Compuware's best practices.
And we do have a very robust catalog of information regarding each obfuscation set of rules, and then that's something that we feel strongly about as we enable these development teams to be more self-service. I mean, they're going to have to understand the rules behind the obfuscated data, so it's imperative that you have some very hot, robust, detailed information about that.
Right. So I think this will be the last question we'll take here. Are your testers testing on cloud platforms, and how do you coordinate cloud and ZOS data?
Not at the moment. I mean, the applications that are on the cloud may not be interacting with other applications. So they have their own tools to obfuscate the data, since the data doesn't have to be in sync. So at the moment, we don't have that scenario.
I know it's an area that you have been researching to decide what you need to do to support those cloud environments as well, based on questions you've asked us.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thanks again, Lynn, Bismarck, and Irene. We had lots of great questions come in. For those questions that we were unable to get to, we are definitely going to be making a point to follow up directly with you. A presentation of the replay and the slides will also be made available after the webcast as well. This concludes today's presentation. We hope you have a great day.